Okay, very good. So we will call the call the meeting to order. And of course, as part of the housekeeping, I read the COVID statement. So let me get to that. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with the ordinance number 20-A14, the ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 pandemic. The members who are electronically present at this meeting are, and please state your name, Brian Williams.
Present.
Diantha.
Present.
John Spigot.
John Springett is here.
Sorry, John. Sorry about that.
Richard.
It's only been about 8 years together, right? All right. Olga? Olga, are you present?
Here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
And of course, I'm present as well. The opportunities for the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting are posted on the Albemarle County website calendar, www.albemarle.org and www.publicinput.com/PDCAC. And so now that housekeeping is cleaned up, have we seen Ned yet?
Yes, he's on.
Okay, where is Ned? Oh, there you are. Welcome, Ned. Ned is our visiting supervisor today, and he comes from the Rio district. So welcome, Ned.
Good morning. Thank you.
Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from February 9th meeting?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Very good. Okay, matters before the public. Greg Jenkins, Mayor Jenkins, have we received any matters before the public with respect to public comment?
No, sir. No comments from the public from last month, Richard.
Okay, well, let me ask you something. What is the best way, and we go through this on every meeting, for the public and our fellow citizens to be able to contact the police department if they have a suggestion, a recommendation, or a complaint?
Okay, so we do have an email address, askthechief@albemarle.org, and that email goes directly to the chief's office. That's a great way of asking a question of the chief's office or one of his staff members. And we also have links on our webpage at the police department to be able to ask a question, file a complaint, accommodation for officers, and those type of things.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much. And Major Jenkins, before I ask you to proceed with your presentation on your annual report of investigations, I did have an item that I know the public would want to hear from you on, which is although we do not opine on the public policing in the city, the citizens of Albemarle County want to know what's being done with respect to investigations to ensure the public safety issues related to the county, and whether what kind of things that are being done from an investigation and a standpoint to prevent issues like spillover. Can you comment to the folks here in the county about what kind of things, measures you might be taking with respect, without commenting on the policies, procedures, or anything associated with the city public policing?
Yes, that's a great question, Richard, and thank you for asking it. I would like everyone to know that with the most recent things that come to my mind are the shootings or the shots fired type of cases. And our investigations division, all of our detectives are working very closely with the detectives in the city of Charlottesville. And if something comes up at the University Police Department, their detectives as well. We are utilizing the state forensic labs. Fortunately for Albemarle, we haven't had any shots fired type cases that our neighbors have had, but we are still working very closely with those detectives to ensure that any cases that criminal investigations that our detectives have, we're running any type of ballistics, shell casings, things like that through NIBIN, which is a ballistic, I guess it's more like a fingerprinting type thing of ballistic shell casings and things like that through the state lab to ensure that something that's happening in the county may be able to link those things that are occurring in the city of Charlottesville or to the University Police Department. So we do have those great working relationships with our local partners in law enforcement here. We also have one detective that's assigned to the FBI Safe Streets Task Force. And that detective, any type of case that has a nexus to the FBI, we're utilizing that resource as well to hopefully link some of those resources to any incidents or events that might be happening in Albemarle County with the city of Charlottesville as well. So those are just some things that we're doing in Albemarle to try to be proactive in preventing this type of violence coming into Albemarle as well.
Okay, well, I'd like to take a moment to go around the room and ask folks if they have any questions with respect to the question that I asked and your answer. Brian, do you have any questions for Major Jenkins?
No question.
Diantha, do you have any questions for the Major?
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I thank you for asking the general question. I think it's important. We saw the editorial in the Daily Progress today, or many of us did. So I appreciate the question. And while I have just a second, I would like to, on another meeting, to have an agenda item around body cameras. This group, the CAC, has talked for several years about body cameras for Albemarle County police officers. And if we could just have an agenda item around that, updating us on where we are in that process, Greg, and but that needs to be not for today. I get that.
Yes, ma'am.
I think it would be a very timely discussion to have right now. Thank you.
Okay, so we will add that item to our next agenda. John, do you have a question for the Major?
I do not.
Olga? Olga, do you have a question for the Major? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the audio.
Sir, can you hear?
You're breaking up.
No, sir.
Oh, okay, very good. And of course, Ned, do you have any questions for the Major about this issue?
Thank you. I do not.
Okay, well, let's move on then. Major Jenkins has been kind enough to do his annual presentation here, and we're going to let you do your thing and listen in. And after you're done with your presentation, which will be 10 minutes or so, then we will go around the room and folks will ask you questions if they wish to. Thank you, Major. Please proceed.
Welcome. So as this committee is aware, myself and Major Reeves and Major Carr have done a year-end review of our bureaus each one of the years. And we thought it was very timely that this committee knew how their police department had really pivoted during this COVID event and how our staff members had to adapt to a lot of the different ways of doing policing during COVID. And this presentation, Cindy, you want to pull up the PowerPoint? This presentation will show you guys just some of the things that a number of our units and divisions have been doing over the past year, and just give you a 50,000-foot overview of some of the things that we've been doing. Next slide, Cindy. As you can see here, though last March, pretty much we had to recalibrate how we were responding to major cases, major events. And this just kind of encapsulates and shows how our detectives had to respond to major cases and crime scenes. So if a detective responded to a homicide during this COVID event, we really had to respond, keeping in mind mask, physical distancing, and things like that. When we responded to these crime scenes, our crime scene technicians, same thing. We would typically have a team of crime scene investigators going in and processing scenes, but we really had to make sure that our staff members, though we had to do a professional job at investigating the scene and collecting evidence, we still had to keep in mind that safety aspect as well. Interviewing victims and witnesses and suspects really had to be done outside of the police department. We didn't want to bring a person that could potentially have COVID into the police department and infect other people. So we really had to do those interviews and stuff out of the police, outside the police department. Court responses, as you can imagine and know very well, that a lot of our courts had shut down or was limiting just a very few people of coming into the courthouses and testifying in cases, which definitely posed some challenges to our detectives and our victim witness services folks. But it really required us to think outside of the box when we were investigating cases, processing crime scenes, and testifying in court. Our evidence unit, again, we thought about staggering schedules. Instead of having 2 people in our evidence unit, we staggered those and had 1 person back there working at a time. When they met with outside of the police department here for returning of property and things like that, we had to meet with them outside of the building. Also taking evidence to the Department of Forensic Science, that had to be really scheduled with them, and they had to know that we were coming down to the lab, and all of those safety protocols had to be put in place as well. Our Freedom of Information Act specialist, FOIA specialist, she really worked from home the entire time and has still been working from home during this COVID. But I'm pleased to say that she was able to meet all of the deadlines of the hundreds of FOIA requests that were still coming into the police department for information. Next slide. Our victim services, our victim witness unit, as you can see early on in during the pandemic, those ladies in the back in victim services, God bless them, they purchased their own hand sanitizers and face masks and were giving them to victims and witnesses of crimes out in the field. They were actually, one of the things that I thought was most impressive with these folks was victims and witnesses, just because of COVID, they still had to meet with these people, and they would meet with them in city parks, county parks, masks, social distancing. They spent funds out of their own pockets to ensure that the victims and witnesses of any of these cases had masks and hand sanitizers themselves. They met with victims like we're doing on all of our meetings through FaceTime, Zoom, any way that we could still stay in contact with our victims of these crimes. These professionals here really did use everything in their toolbox to be able to stay in communication with the folks that have been victims of any crimes. Our Spanish-speaking victim witness person, she would translate a lot of the forms and stuff over the phone. Again, using any method that they could possibly use to stay in contact with our customers. Protective orders was and still is a huge thing, though, COVID and the courts were locked down. They had to try to really figure out how victims could still petition the court to get protective orders, and that really posed a lot of challenges for them as well. Next slide. Our professional and training development unit, which is our recruitment and hiring folks and our folks that are in charge of training. During the time that COVID hit, we had an active academy class going on, and they had to really rethink how, when the academy shut down, we brought those recruits back here within the police department and had them doing telephone reports and things like that, kept them busy, taking reports on the telephone. When they typically, on a normal year, we would bring them back and do our mini academy here. While the academy was shut down, we went ahead and had our TPDU folks doing the mini academy while they weren't in the police academy. So we had that taken care of. We typically have 2 to 3 application processes a year. As you can see, we ended up having like 11 of them. We had to make them much smaller so we could try to fill the ranks of any vacancies that we might have within the police department. Expanded their working and staggered schedules. We did that with most all of our office staff here in the police department. We were able to get all of our in-service officers that needed the in-service requirement for their certification for 40 hours. We were able to get all of that done by December the 1st without sending people to the academy. So the academy was great to work with over this period of time to help us meet all of these required standards that we have to each year. Next slide. Support services. That's our folks that at the front desk. Happy to say that though COVID hit us and we were scheduled to do a second mock assessment for accreditation, that had to be postponed. So we had to work a lot virtually with assessors to really prepare for our reaccreditation. That was scheduled to take place in June or late June, I believe it was, or first part of July, but it got canceled as well. So we ended up having 3 assessors come in September, and we were successful at meeting the reaccreditation standards for the 5th time. So it's our 6th accreditation, 5th reaccreditation. Happy to say that they're 100% in compliance with our accreditation standards, policies, procedures, all of that stuff. So we're now working on our 6th reaccreditation for the next 4 years. Out of that process, we learned that one of the gold standards for accreditation management was Power DMS. So we were able to run the Power DMS through the EAC, the county's EAC architectural review. And we're now in the process of implementing Power DMS to help us manage our policy and accreditation standards. Timekeeper implementation, that was a process that was a year long for us. I would say that we met 2 and 3 times a day, every day, each week, until finally December the 5th, we flipped the switch and we went live into Timekeeper. And now I'm happy to say that we've been successful now in being in Timekeeper for now 4 pay cycles. So I know our county board members understand what Timekeeper is, but it's a time management system that the county has gone to, and the police department transitioned into it in December. Grant funding, you can see that we continue to apply for grants. We were able to get a coronavirus emergency supplemental funding to help us buy PPE. Our victim witness folks were successful in getting their grant audit done, and I'm happy to say that they applied and were successful at getting this year's grant funding for staff and services as well for our victim services folks. Next slide. And that is all I have, Richard, for my section of the presentation.
Okay, well, let's go around the room and ask some questions of Major Jenkins. Brian, what do you have for the Major?
Really don't have a question. Thank you so much for the update.
Yes, sir.
Diantha, you have a question for investigations?
I guess you're talking about training, Greg, And I don't want to get ahead of the presentation. I would be interested in an update on where you stand with recruitment and retention and staffing, but you may have that later on in your presentation. So
I'm not, I think his part of the presentation, are you still doing more or is that it, Jeff?
No,
Right.
that's all, Richard, for me.
Can you take a moment to answer Diane's question then?
Mhm.
I was thinking if you were going to present that sometime this morning, then we don't need to do it right now if you have it in your presentation or one of the presentations. That's all.
No, I can certainly give you an update on it if you'd like.
Yes, please do so.
Yes, sir. Diantha, right now we are still recruiting. We just had a recruitment process a week ago. We had 10 people show up. As you can imagine, with not only COVID and all of the events that have been going on nationally, the amount of people that we're seeing apply for police officer positions has dramatically dropped. This last process, we had 26 applications and we had 10 people show up. And if we have out of 10 people show up, we may get one or two of those folks that are successful in completing the entire process, go to background, pass polygraphs and things like that. So we're not seeing the applications coming in that we had been seeing, let's say 2 years ago. Right now, because of retirements and resignations, we're 9 positions short on the police sworn positions. But you know, I'm happy to say that we still do have young men and women applying to be police officers. Some certified police officers that are applying, but what we've really seen with these certified officers, Ms. McKeel, is they can't get through our process. You know, our background process is a pretty rigorous process. And I know Chief Lance has given me and Major Reeves very strict guidelines that we are not going to lower standards just to fill a vacancy. We will run short. We will not fill a vacancy just to have a body in it. So we're maintaining our standards here. We're pushing forward. I know Chief Lance has 2 people on his desk for consideration for hire, and Major Reeves and I have 2 more people for consideration on our desk. So we're optimistic that we're going to be able to fill these vacancies. We keep pushing forward with them, and I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. And I appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, John, you have any questions for the major?
Probably, yes. One follow-up on the staffing, Major, what is you have retirements and then you have folks that have chosen a different career path. And you mentioned them as a corporate number, or not number, but basically a category. How many people are just deciding now that they don't want to be police officers?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, John. I will just give you one brief example. Chief Lance hired 4 people and went to the academy. The second day of the police academy, 2 of them dropped out, said, "This is not for me." We are seeing that. People are saying, you know, I'm just going to make a career change, whether it's a decision that's been made by them and their families, or it's just not their cup of tea. And they end up resigning and leaving law enforcement altogether. It's hard to put a number on it. I just know that in the years that I've been managing and overseeing training and hiring and recruiting, I've never seen 2 people at one time the second day. Now, we've had people leave the academy, but it's a little bit further in the process. But the second day of the academy have 2, and one of those young folks was a minority. The second day, they both quit, said, I'm not going to do this. It's too much.
My second question is a little bit broader than that. It really is based on your changing a lot of your procedures. to accommodate COVID restrictions. Have you determined that there are new ways of doing things that may carry forward in the future when COVID is less of an issue?
Yes, sir. I think a lot of our civilian staff that we had offices and space here within the police department. I know I manage the majority of the civilian staff within the department, and we have truly found that people can work from home and they can be very effective in doing their jobs from home. And so it's worked out well, and I do believe that, you know, the county has certainly developed a telework policy to manage that process, and they've been great. Our board members have embraced that part as well for teleworking, and it's worked very good here, John.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Olga, do you have any questions for the major?
Are you able to hear me?
Sort of in and out a little bit there. All
Can
right.
you hear me? Follow me.
I think she put something in chat. Is that your question, Olga?
I did put it in chat. Yeah, that was my question.
Okay, I got it. So Richard, what she says, for the Spanish-speaking victim unit, is there a need for volunteers? Olga, to answer your question, I think at this point, the county's posture for keeping the buildings closed is in effect, at least for the time being. So right now, the only volunteers that we have is our auxiliary police officers within the building. Other than that, our internships, our volunteer programs, it's really been, I hate to use the word suspended, but it has been stopped for right now just because of safety protocols, not only for the men and women that work in the police department in the building, but for their safety as well, you know?
Okay, well then,
You mentioned during your presentation, you mentioned during your presentation that you needed that some folks translated over the phone, and that's what got me thinking about that opportunity. I don't know, you know, you'd have to be actually a staff to be able to do that. I know that's some serious stuff that you're translating for.
Yeah,
I was just curious as love the opportunity, if I could with that, with the translation, a couple languages, if you know, if there was an actual need for it. That was what I was asking.
I see. Okay. Richard, I think I caught that she wanted to be able to help if there was a need.
yes, and also, while she would like you to make her aware when the buildings do open up, but secondly, whether there could be a intermediate assistance from the Hispanic speaking community with respect to them assisting in phone dialogue.
Uh-huh. So I know Jennifer Hernandez is, she works part-time here in our victim services, Olga. So she's a paid employee here, and she works out of our victim services. You know, what first comes to my mind, if we have a volunteer for what you're talking about, Spanish speaking, I think that would probably be more for our patrol officers in the field that might need that type of a service. So maybe Major Reeves and I can talk and see how we might be able to utilize that type of service here within the police department and get back with you on it.
Well, it's very important that and deeply appreciated that Olga has these kind of resources and is willing to be of assistance. So when things open up, and particularly maybe we'll ask Major Reeves whether he has on the patrol side some interest in what Olga has to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Richard, this is John Spring. I just might mention that two of the auxiliary police officers are fluent in Spanish, and have worked with over the years, both the investigation side as well as the victim side. So that's other resources that are available now.
All right. Ned, Ned Galloway, do you have any questions for the major?
And I don't need a lot of detail here, Major, but you know, when I think of all of our departments that were doing a lot of work from home operations,
Yes, sir.
I, for whatever reason, just didn't think of the police department and what might be doing work from home. And I guess I don't necessarily think of you guys as always sitting in an office or at a desk either. So that might be part of it. Can you just give me some sort of like brief overview of how the work of home has impacted either your department or the whole Bureau? Or?
Well, certainly, you know, our detectives, because I have, you know, so many, 15 assigned to a small space back there, we had to, you know, we couldn't have folks working with inside the police department. We have the majority of them back now, but we had to stagger rotations, a lot of virtual meetings and stuff. But they actually would still getting assigned cases, but they would go from home and go out into the field and work the investigation without coming here into the office. Our services folks, our front desk folks, now they had to be here, 24/7 operation there. But what we did is you know, had masks, sanitizers, things like that. But we also have a file room that's just right off of the front window up there. And we literally utilized that file room to put the second person in just so we could still answer the phones and maintain that high level of service out of our services division. Our civilian folks, we really did, unless they had to be in the office, they worked from home. And we would just meet regularly via Zoom or Teams meeting and stay in that communication with them. And that's the way I still do with the civilian staff that are working from home. So it's actually worked out very well. I think, like a lot of us, Mr. Galloway, you know, we weren't sure how this was going to work via working from home, but I think staff has really adapted to the new way of business. And I personally feel, as their commander, that it's worked out very well. And I think they've become accustomed to it as well. And it's been very effective for us.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that I want to thank you very much there, Major, for
Yes,
your
sir.
comprehensive presentation. And at this point, we're going to welcome Deputy Chief Sean Reeves, who also is a major. Deputy Chief?
Yes, thank you, Richard.
I do have one question before you proceed into your presentation, and that has to do with the COVID Center at Penny's. Can you just give us a 1 minute kind of how you're keeping an eye on that, because they're processing between 1,000 and 2,000 people a day over there?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. Last week, myself as well as our Special Operations Division Commander visited the JCPenney site and did a security walkthrough. And at the conclusion of that meeting, we determined that we're going to offer an overtime assignment to staff, have a sworn law enforcement staff to augment the private security hired for JCPenney. Right now, we haven't had any issues or experienced any issues on site, but having that law enforcement presence at the site, just as an extra layer of security at the CDC's request, or the request for Blue Ridge Health District and the Emergency Operations Center.
Well, that's great. I'm sure the public is very interested and appreciative of your having a presence during this pandemic. All right, so why don't you proceed with the patrol side of the equation, if you will, and when you're done, then I'll go around the room and ask folks to ask questions about your presentation. So please begin.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, my name is Major Sean Reeves, for those of you that don't know me, and I am the Deputy Chief of Police who oversees the Operations Bureau, which consists of all sworn patrol officers, as well as our traffic, our K-9, as well as some of the former school resource officers and other specialty units that support operations. And I'd like to begin this presentation by showing a map of how our police districts are set up and established to give you a frame of reference as we proceed through this presentation as to just how many resources are actually on the street versus what sometimes people think is actually on the street. As you can see, the county's broken up into 9 sectors, but they're actually 2 districts. The northeast corridor is the Jefferson District, and everything you see to the south and west is the Blue Ridge District. And each one of the 9 sectors has 1 officer assigned to it. Unfortunately, during this past year, due to COVID and exposures and injuries, there were several days that our officers operated below minimal staffing levels. Minimal staffing levels being 1 sector, 1 officer in every sector. So you combine that with what Major Jenkins was talking about, the vacancies, and what Mr. Springer was talking about as far as officers looking to get out of law enforcement or seek jobs elsewhere, it does become problematic. But I would like to express my sincerest appreciation and gratitude for the women and men of the police department who demonstrated their resiliency and commitment to duty through all the adversity that you're going to see through this presentation. I could not be more proud of the work that they've done. So with this frame of reference, we're going to go ahead and also talk a little bit about just law enforcement in general in 2020 and just what a difficult year it was. Again, we're faced with protests, calls for abolishing and defunding the police department, the contentious national election, a rise in violent crimes, and all while our staff was operating during a pandemic. Our profession endured some of the most challenging times in recent history. Also tragically, during 2020, 359 law enforcement officers lost their lives in the line of duty. Sadly, the top 3 causes were COVID was the number 1, gunshot wounds or death by gunshot was number 2, and officers involved in motor vehicle crashes, fatal crashes, was the 3rd leading cause of death. So again, this just serves as a reminder that this job is not without its risk, and there's real prices and consequences that are affiliated with this job. So again, as you'll see in the coming slides, I could be more proud of the work that our women and men have done this past year. So we'll talk a little bit about operating during the pandemic. So last March, the police department was assigned to representation on the county's COVID incident management team. That's what IMT stands for, incident management team. And not only that, but we also maintain continued 24/7 public safety operations. Across the organization, we all had to learn to adapt to new and innovative ways to operate. What is somewhat unique to public safety is adapting while still having to interact with victims, witnesses, and suspects and offenders. To help us navigate these scenarios, department leadership worked closely with the COVID-19 IMT for finding solutions to a wide array of scenarios in an effort to protect our staff to the best of our ability to mitigate risk exposures. Some of these risk mitigation measures were, we altered our response to calls for service. When practical, we had asked people to step outside of the house and meet our officers to maintain social distancing. We transitioned to pure virtual roll calls as opposed to coming to the police department for roll calls. We made the conscientious decision to reduce motor vehicle stops, which actually, there was a cause and effect with that. The reason being, reducing motor vehicle stops is we didn't want to put our officers in unnecessary contact with the public at that time. You figure this time last year, there's still a lot of unknowns with this pandemic, and we were asking our officers just to make stop in some of the most egregious offenses. And then we also changed our means of transporting arrestees. All of our, most of our patrol vehicles have cages, and our officers would make their custodial arrests and transport the offender down to the jail. And we switched it to a van to transport all prisoners in a van, just to avoid and cut down on arrest. One of the other dynamics that we were faced with was keeping up with the governor's executive orders, as well as some of the county ordinances when it came to COVID enforcement. And the police department's posture for several months was education, compliance before enforcement. We didn't want to come out heavy-handed and start making arrests. We wanted to educate the public, seek compliance, and then resort to enforcement as a last-minute effort. And in almost every single case, education, compliance resolved the issues and resolved the complaint. So, you know, our law enforcement officers out in the street were very conscientious about not coming down too heavy-handed on folks. Now we're talking a little bit about national, local unrest and the rise of anti-police sentiment. And all these photos were taken from local events that our police department supported. Not only did our officers have to contend with unknowns of operating during a global pandemic, they became the target of anti-police sentiment that manifested on a national level, in turn impacting law enforcement operations across the Commonwealth. The Albemarle County Police Department worked closely with our federal, state, and regional partners to protect protesters throughout the summer. Even the protesters who were calling for the end of our jobs and saying we're going to lose our jobs, and we still were committed to protecting the protesters, shutting down streets, supporting the city police department in several of their larger protests and operations, and we did so safely and without incident. During this time, Confederate statues across the nation became flashpoints of violence and civil unrest. We worked hand in hand with the county IMT to ensure the safety of the county employees and community members who were present during the removal of the At Ready statue. We were the first statue, I learned through the work during the county incident management team, that we were the first jurisdiction under the new law last July to go through the correct legal process to remove the statue, and it was done so with no significant law enforcement actions or any law enforcement actions with the public, for that matter. So it was a peaceful incident. As we saw protests, you know, even within the Commonwealth, violence erupt around these statues. Ours was fortunate enough to become a model, and I know this because at conferences throughout the year, when people heard that we were from the Albemarle County Police Department, other law enforcement agencies were seeking our advice on how we were able to run such a successful operation, which is a testament to the work, the unified work that all county employees did that was part of the IMT. And we looked at this as a construction project first and a security project second, with a security component. This wasn't, law enforcement wasn't the face of this removal, even though we had a role in it. We wanted to make sure that it was done with a lot of community stakeholders at the table for this. And then immediately following the statue removal, PD transitioned to election day operations, working closely with our voter registration office and our federal, state, and law enforcement partners, as well as various community members, to plan for any number of scenarios that could have played out during the week of the national election. It was a contentious election, and nerves, you know, tensions were high, and people were nervous about what to expect in the unknown, just given the state of the country at the time. And we were able to attend community meetings and quell people's fears, work with different churches and different, you know, the voter registrations office, again, to have plans in place at a regional level to respond to any number of scenarios. Again, we were fortunate and blessed that nothing negative happened during that day, and it was a peaceful transition at the local level. Next slide, please. Okay, so it's important, going back to the original slide, when we talk about the county and the 720 plus square miles and the officers that work day in, day out, that during the pandemic and during all the unrest, our staff still had to perform their fundamental duties. When somebody picks up the phone and calls 911 to report an incident or report a crime, that they're still out handling calls for service. Last year, we responded over 61,000 calls for service. So as you'll see, suicides were up last year, 27%. Domestic incidents were up. Orders of protection or protective orders were up. Traffic fatalities were up 34%. And proactive patrols were up. Public generated calls for service were down. Traffic stops were significantly down. Reporter crashes were down, and arrests were down. And then as you'll see, you know, some of the more significant changes based on our 3-year average was, you know, our murder rates went up, and our stolen automobile rates went up as well. So, however, there were no significant mental health calls for service remained high, and there's no significant change in mental health calls for service, but we did note a change in suicides within the county. So despite the pandemic and everything else, our officers continue to find ways to conduct community outreach whenever possible. Given what was going on in the country at the time, we felt it was imperative to seek out whatever opportunity we could in a way that was safe for us and safe for the community, to give back to the community and help out and not lose the ground that we've gained over the past several years in community outreach and community relations. Whether it was assisting in the drug take back program, passing out turkeys during Thanksgiving to families in need, mentoring youth at the Southwood Boys and Girls Club, or buying gifts for local children during the holiday season, officers paying out of their own pocket to buy gifts for kids in need. Officers continue to realize the importance of developing and maintaining positive and meaningful community relationships. And the pictures you see here are just a few examples of the wonderful work our officers did this past year and continue to do, that largely goes unseen by the public. These officers don't do it for attention. They do it because they genuinely care about their job and their public. And I do think that the return on investment is when we do have protests and we do have things go on in this anti-police sentiment. Some of it's not directed specifically at the Albemarle County Police Department. It's more of the national frustration and calls for police reform. And you're not seeing, thankfully, the violence that erupts in other jurisdictions that you see surrounding us and in other parts of the Commonwealth and parts of the country. I think that's in large part due to the investment that our staff makes on a daily basis. Next slide, please. I'll leave you all with this, that our officers are fortunate to be valued and respected by many of our community members, our business partners, our local nonprofits, as well as our churches and local county government peers, and board members as well. This respect is earned from our collective efforts in enforcing law in an equitable and just manner, as well as through the countless hours our ACPD officers spend establishing and building trust within our community. And morale hit its peaks and valleys last year with officers. And I shared this Gallup poll with them. I stumbled upon this Gallup poll last year on honesty and ethics in law enforcement, especially in this time where several of our officers and just officers across the country just don't feel valued. And I share this with them to say, hey, look, despite some of the noise that you're hearing, police officers are still one of the most honest and ethical professions according to the general public. And I share this slide with them as kind of an eye opener to kind of take a step back, don't listen to some of the negativity, and continue to do your job, continue to be resilient, and continue to remember why you chose this profession. So I'll leave you all with that, and thank you for your time, and thank you all for your support. And I'll open up, turn it over to Richard for questions.
Okay, then. Thank you so much there, Major Reeves. And we're going to go around the room here, and members are going to ask a few questions. Brian, do you have a question for Major?
Yes, Major Reeves, thank you so much for your presentation. I do want to ask a question, but also provide a comment. In terms of the comment, perception is reality. It's all about optics, right? When we think about it. I push back a little bit when I hear the word anti-policing, or that phrase. I think it's anti-bad policing. Because much like the Gallup poll data shows, the public supports police, really good policing, but they are opposed to really bad policing. That kind of lends itself to my question. When we think about what just emerged from Windsor Police Department and how that is having an impact, not just across the Commonwealth, but also across the nation, what can we do here to make sure that the public understands that we are not Windsor, that our officers aren't Windsor, that we don't operate that way? Are there some opportunities for us to take advantage to kind of tell what we do and what we don't do? And I think that might be a way to inform the public that we don't support those types of things that we witnessed that happened to Second Lieutenant Nazario with the U.S. Armed Forces.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a fair statement. And based on my direct observations as being a command liaison for several of these protests, it seemed like there was two narratives. To your point, that there's a narrative of police reform in a positive, healthy way that's productive for the community and abolishing bad police practices or corrupt police practices. But there's also a segment of that narrative where there is a vocal minority of people within that group that kind of latched on, that is calling for the abolishment of police and doing away with police altogether. And so when you break those two apart, yes, I agree with you 100%. And I think, from my opinion, continue to do community outreach, community presentations, virtual rooms. I'm an alumni of the Leadership Charlottesville group, and I've gone through a handful of presentations about these courageous conversations about policing, and really trying to draw the distinction through our professional police department and the way that we train our officers and our commitment to training, and to Major Jenkins's point of having higher standards when it comes to hiring practices, to make sure that we are getting the best possible applicants that are a reflection of our citizens and our community. That's what the community wants. So the police department continues to seek out opportunities to speak at public forums and have those open, honest dialogues as well with our community partners. I think that is a good starting point, and continue our path towards building relationships and establishing relationships, but also through actions and not words, building that public trust and that community trust. So anytime there's an opportunity that anybody in this room or anybody that's going to be watching this video would like to speak to the officers, have sit down in these courageous conversations, we'd be more than happy to go out and do so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Major. Diantha, you have a question for the Major?
Well, I guess I have a question and a comment, which is what most of us have, I guess. But I really appreciate Brian's question. And Sean, when we talk about Albemarle County policing, we always come back to community policing and the importance of our police officers being in our community and folks learning to know them so that there's a relationship. And I really always remind myself that goes back to President Obama's 21st century policing model that we implemented way back when. I think, in all honesty, Steve Sellers was our police chief then, and we continued it. We never stopped it. It's based on geo-policing, community policing, and training, right?
You are correct.
At the heart of it, it's training and knowing your community, and the community knowing the police officers. So I really appreciate that we have continued that model in Albemarle County, number one. Number two, I attended the NAACP meeting last night, our local NAACP meeting, as I do when I can. And there was a long discussion at that meeting about what happened at Windsor. And I think it would be, I'm just suggesting that it would be a great idea, Greg and Sean, for you all to reach out to the our local NAACP and ask to be on the agenda to talk about what we've sort of talked about today. I just think it would be a really great idea, and they would appreciate it. And I mentioned last night the 21st century policing models, geo-policing. And some of them may have been a little bit familiar with it, but it really is, I think, the basis of what we do in some respects. You guys have implemented it beautifully, and but it has to be about relationships.
Sean, do you think that you can, Sean, you think that you can take some time with Greg to inform the local NAACP about the progress associated with geo-policing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that ties into our geographic policing, like Ms. McKee was saying.
Okay.
And that is one component. There's several other components to the
We're running a little short on time, so let me move on to John. Do you have a question?
A brief one, I think. Richard, Major, thank you for a very good presentation. Both you and Greg have done wonderful things in terms of presenting facts. I guess I'd ask you the same question I asked Greg, and that is, during the course of the COVID process, you've changed procedures. Have you identified any that you will kind of live beyond COVID and there are better ways of doing things?
Yeah, absolutely. From an operational standpoint, we continue to seek that feedback from our officers at the ground level of what they're seeing that's working and what's not working. You know, it's been hit or miss, but there are certain things, you know, the operational side of the house is a little bit different than the operational support, the administrative side of the house. So there's things that we have to do hands-on with our staff. But whenever there's opportunities to make improvements to process, we're going to capitalize on this. So yes, John.
Okay, then, Olga, do you have a question for the major? No way. Okay, we got the signal from Olga. All righty then. It looks as though we're running a little short on time, but we have a few minutes left. Can you give us a brief update on where we are with respect to crisis intervention and de-escalation training for lethal force? I know that that's an ongoing effort with respect to the training. So if you could take a couple of minutes about those two issues. One, again, is the crisis intervention training for de-escalation of crisis intervention, and that largely goes towards domestics, which are, of course, a very dangerous call to take. And then, of course, what we're doing about de-escalation of lethal force. And how that's moving along with respect to the training.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Before I jump into that, I'd like to circle back to Mr. Galloway. I don't know if you had an opportunity, if there's any questions that you had regarding.
Oh, I thought Mr. Galloway, I didn't realize you were still here. I'm sorry, Ned, because I thought that you were leaving a little early.
I was, but no worries. I was lingering.
Oh, okay. Well, then, do you have any questions for the major?
I will, but I ask that you don't have to take the time now, but maybe you could just follow up with an email. That would be fine. My question was going to be on the sectors. If you took traffic out of the equation, I'd be curious which sectors are your busiest in terms of calls out.
Yes, sir. In 30 seconds response to that.
Yeah.
Part of our strategic plan right now is doing a comprehensive analysis with response times as well as appropriate sector coverages. One of the things that I'm exploring with our district commanders is there a need, because this sector model has been in effect for the past 15, almost 20 years. We haven't deviated from, we've changed it slightly, and Ms. McKeel acknowledges that. And with the expansion and growth of Albemarle County, especially within the urban rings and out the west side, whether it's time we revisit, and I think we're at that time where we start drafting up models for the future of Albemarle County and what that looks like for redefining sectors, so that way we can have appropriate response times. But I can certainly, and maybe that's a conversation for another day at one of these meetings, a larger conversation when we have the data, but we're analyzing response times, urban growth and development as well.
Thank you.
Is that a topic that we might want to put on next meeting for your major? Do you think you'd be able to prepare and give a larger answer to that question at our next meeting?
Yes, sir. And we can discuss this offline when we talk about body cameras as well, because that's part of another project that the police department is currently working on. We just received a grant from the state for funding body cameras. So I think between body cameras and then maybe another follow-up conversation, and we'll just see how in depth we want to be. So we can talk about that, Richard.
How would we define that other conversation? We got body cameras as well as redistricting the traffic component?
Yeah. Just the police department strategic plan, a strategic plan for the police department.
Strategic plan. Okay. All right, so we are just about out of time. I'm going to also ask at the next meeting that we have an update on these last two items, which were the de-escalation of the crisis intervention training with respect to domestics in particular, and then also lethal force and a continued de-escalation of lethal force training. And also, we're going to touch upon mental health. So if you could be prepared for some of those questions next meeting, that would be great. All right, having said all that, we are just about out of time. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Oh, by the way, our next meeting is June 8th, of course. And do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I want to thank the committee for its wonderful contribution and time, and also both the majors for coming here today, and all the support services I see on the screen as well. And Cynthia, have a nice weekend. And we will see each other in a couple of months. And thank you once again, one and all.